talk about determining your costs. Again, I've been screen printing 30 years, and that doesn't mean I have all the perfect answers, but I've done a lot, including been very successful printing some 3 million pieces a year, very profitable. Screen printing, but not a big, but you got to be profitable when you've got maybe only one press and you're printing 100,000 pieces a year, or maybe you're printing less than that. And those are the things you have to consider in pricing. Are you a volume shop, or is it, are you going to be small, and then how are you going to make profit in that? And you got to look at your costs. Over the years, we've done some incredible efficiency and quality things, winning a ton of SCI awards and impressions awards with some of my older companies. And really, we couldn't get to that point without being efficient and profitable. So it's really painful to know you have all these huge operating costs, your building, your rent, your machines, and not really having a plan on how you're going to cover those. I've had friends in the business or customers that I work with, and it's very common kind of really just look at what the competition's doing and say, okay, I got a price like that to be competitive. And certainly that is one aspect of it. But I would never want to set my pricing without knowing what my costs are and trying to set and then build my sale prices off of those costs and then do those comparisons. So the truth is, you might not be able to compete with what you're looking at, and as far as price. So you might have to get your pricing as close as you can, but you got to remain profitable and then look at other avenues to compete where you have an added benefit, which we'll get into, whether that's free shipping or something else. And we're going to look at determining your hourly rate, your material costs, analyzing your production output, and then applying that data to a price matrix. So I'm going to click to a spreadsheet I set up, and this is, first we'll just go through each little section here. And again, remember, this is, you can take what you learn from this, or maybe you're already doing something similar, and massage it and find a different way or a different approach. I'm just trying to get across, the key here is for screen printing is you got to come up with an hourly rate. And you got to know your material costs, and then you got to be able to plug that into pricing somehow. So I broke this apart into, again, I don't know if the size of your shops, but it would apply to anything. In this case, I'm kind of looking at a scenario with 2 automatic presses. And we got to list our wages. So I've listed wages. We've got management. We've got some office workers. If you've got, this is a pretty simplified version. This is assuming that everybody in the office makes the same wages and so forth, and everybody in production makes the same $15 per hour. There could be people, you probably have varying rates depending on what they're doing, if they're an operator or a folder and so forth. Bottom line is I look at things annually. So you have 2,080 hours in a year, and it's certainly, I got to be honest, easier to do pricing when you have some history, whether it's only a year's history. When you start getting into 5, 10 years of history, you have lots of data to work with. But I always reanalyze pricing for the new year based off of the previous year. So if you're just getting started, you got to plug in what you know now, and you could come up with an hourly rate based off of what you're paying everybody. I'm not going to get into exactly the formulas, but it's basically, I'm listing all those wages, coming up with an hourly rate, so you've got your annual income, but per hour to cover everybody, in this example, it's $148 or $150, rounding up. Then you've got your overhead, which you also got to figure out. So you've got utilities, you've got your building perhaps, and I broke it out, rent, maintenance. I'm sure I did not cover everything here, and you want to cover everything. That's just, look at your financials and your bank statements. I've got in here some press, like lease payments, or perhaps you have a loan payment. Don't want you to think about amortized costs here. I want you to think about cash flow. What is the nut that you pay every month? So if you have a $500 payment or a $300 payment or a $1,000 payment for equipment, whatever it is, that's what you want to plug in here, because that's really what you really got to make sure you cover. Your exposure equipment, computers, basically everything that you're going to be paying for that's going to be in your overhead. even, and I even put in the little UPS daily pickup. There's a rate you pay for that. So everything that you got in your overhead. So you've got your two figures there that come up that I'm going to be using for a total to come up with an hourly. And then you've got your determine your material cost. Now this is separate from the hourly rate or your overhead, your fixed, basically fixed cost. And there's a couple ways to approach this, but basically, again, if you're starting from scratch, it's a lot harder to determine. When you have some history, you can see what are you paying for supplies in the office, and what do you. And yes, by the way, if anyone was thinking, I want to cover everything in production. That's where the money's made. When that press turns, that's going to bring in money to cover the office, shipping, the whole 9 yards. I want to pay for my shipping and receiving people with what's made off a press. Now, it doesn't mean you can't break that out and try and cover it in your shipping charges, but the way I approach it is I want to cover everybody when that press turns. So you got your mesh, your emulsion, miscellaneous supplies, ink, that's everything, scrapers, spray wig, adhesives, the whole 9 yards. Now, how much do you use of that in a year, and how do you kind of apply it to the job? That's where there are a couple different methods. I look at it like, okay, what did we do last year, and how much should we spend? Now, if I have some extra ink on the shelf and I have some extra spray wig cans, that's fine. I'm still going to cover it, because it's if you really nitpick that much, you're not, it's not even a penny. You're never going to come up with that overflow. The other thing you can do is try to build out your material cost by the job. So for instance, if you know a gallon of ink has a general coverage of 1,000 shirts for 12 by 12 area, I believe if you do the math, I've done this approach as well, it's 3 to 5 cents a shirt, whatever that is. You can come up with what ink is coverage based off of that data, how much product you use and materials. I just found over time it was actually more accurate and much easier to look at how much we actually bought and then come up with a rate. So how did I come up with this 7 cents per unit? Well, that's by analyzing our output, which again, if you're new to the business or just starting, it's a little bit more difficult without some kind of history. But this 7 cents has taken this almost $55,000, and it's dividing that by what this scenario did, 750,000 pieces. So that was assuming that, okay, these materials were needed to do that many pieces. Then you've got, if I'm analyzing my production output, in this little scenario, I'm looking at the previous year. Now I like to throw in a potential. And this potential is based off of, okay, I got 2 automatic presses. They average 500 pieces per hour. I know that presses can run 1,000 pieces an hour, but it's still a good number. Even with the faster machines today, I think it's still reliable and consistent. And that includes downtime. So it actually, in an hour, nets 500, even with stopping to fill a pinhole and so forth. Again, this is all based off of 2,080 hours per year. So this does not account for overhead. And overtime. And a quick side note on overtime. I've done both scenarios where I've tried to factor in some estimates on overtime. I found in the long run, I didn't need to factor in overtime because, quite frankly, once that first shift or the 40 hours is covered with rates I build, overtime's gravy. In theory, you don't even need to charge extra, but there are things that you might have. Plus, why not make a little bit more money with a rush charge and so forth? And there's lots of ways to look at the overtime, but enough on that. So then I look at what we actually did. Okay, we did 750,000. Now that seems like a huge disparity, but actually, with experience, it's not. I can certainly improve that, but I'm not surprised because if you're printing now, you realize that press is not always turning. There's lots of downtime instead of time. Excuse me, throat's drying up here. So our actual in this scenario was we were outputting 361 pieces per hour. So I took a look and I said, I want to actually improve that. And I set up the target. I think we could improve that. The potential is obviously not going to happen. But I based this off of, okay, we can get 500 pieces an hour, but let's just see if we can improve this year and get our output to be, remember, this is on 2 presses. So this is up, this figure here was 361. That's actually about 180 per press. Here I'm looking at bumping it up to 312. I think from experience, a very doable target by improving our production system. Sometimes just how we use our labor, mostly how we use our labor. And so that gives me a unit cost of 35 cents. And then I plug in those materials that I had over here of 7 cents. I have 42 cents based off my new scenario to cover. Now, if I have the same output as I did the previous year, I need 68 cents. Now, that's a huge, again, looks like a big disparity. That's how much some simple improvements production can improve your bottom line. That said, that's probably a whole other seminar. It is a whole other seminar talking about how to do that. But for instance, if your people are standing around waiting for someone to set up a press, can you be speeding up by having all the materials there in advance? Sometimes having a float or an extra person, that person at 10, 15 bucks an hour can save you 20% production time by keeping those presses rolling, for instance. So anyhow, I've now basically got my per unit cost, and I could start building my price matrix. So now I've got my data, and I also know the key factor here is I got to cover setup time. So here I've got my press rate, 500 pieces per hour, and I've taken this, I'm just pulling data from everything I built here, and I've got an hourly rate of 176 here to cover, which gives me a unit price of 22 cents. Now, in my spreadsheet here, I can change this. So if I'm going to say, hey, it's going to be 300, okay, or if I want to use that value I had, my goal of 312, plug in 312, and that's going to adjust. There's that 35 cents with the 40 cents of materials that I got to cover. But key here is I got to factor in setup time, because that's one mistake I see a lot of people make is they say, hey, I can print 500. Hey, my press output 750 pieces an hour, and at that rate, I can charge 25 cents, and we'll be making tons of money. Well, the reality is, you're probably not going to net 750 pieces per hour when you consider all the things that can cause downtime. Although, from experience, we did net on our 8 presses about 750 an hour in optimum times, and that was having always a floater, keeping the thing inked, having materials always at the press, and so forth. There are things you can do to truly net. I'm not as concerned about what the press is rated at. That's neither here nor there. The bottom line is the appreciated output is how you work with your labor and your system. So that said, you got to cover that overtime. So you're never going to, unless you've got a job that just runs for the whole year, the reality is you're setting up and tearing down a press. So what I did was, taking that same hourly rate, I plugged in the number. Now, I've still to this day like 15 minutes per color. Even with registration systems where you can set up a 6-color design in 10, 12 minutes, you still got to read a ticket. You still got to tweak it. If you're like shops that I run, you have a manager approve the print before you actually start producing the shirts, all those things. So this number is what works for you. You got to figure that out. And you might want to do a time analysis. How much, on average, take a 1-color job, a 6-color job, how long does it take from the moment you go to the job to actually be printing and producing products? All that time you want to cover. So I believe in figuring out, because it works with pricing, what it is per color. If you figure it's, okay, 5 minutes per color, but there's always 15 minutes just to gear up, then you restructure this so that you figure in that flat rate, that call it the minimum for every job, and then you add on for each additional color. I've always just run off of basing it per color. And that gives me a setup rate. So what my spreadsheet does, it looks up and it says, okay, for 1 color at 12 pieces, I'm going to for each 12, it's going to be 42 cents, but plus I got to amortize in this 27 for setup. So this formula here is doing that. It's saying, okay, $27.19 divided by 12 pieces plus the 42 cents. As you can see, and this surprises people quite often, is at 12 pieces, this 42 cents is nothing. It's all that labor to set up the press that's mostly in there. And then, of course, as you go to each quantity break, that price drops because this $27 per color is just amortized over that many more pieces. And you just do that like in kind across the board. So it's 6 colors. Obviously, it's got to factor in this rate times, you know, that many colors and so forth. And then that unit rate of 42 cents really isn't changing. Because I've always covered, you know, you can get crazy and try to cover ink for a left chest versus a full front. When it's like pennies, I don't advise that. Just it's based, because really your press runs, yes, you can shorten the chopper cylinder and so forth, but in reality, it's a lot easier to build your price structure on one stroke, the whole thing, and the ink is, in my opinion, ink is cheap when you look at labor. It's all labor. Then the last thing you're doing is you're taking your cost matrix and you're applying a margin. Now, whether contract screen printing, this is critical. That's where you make all your money. And yes, I've done a lot of that. But the other thing is even if you really are, if you're selling business to business or business to consumer, and it's not wholesale, and it's about the shirt, and you make money at markup on the shirt, that's all well and good. You still should be profitable. In theory, if you never sold a shirt and every shirt came to you, that screen printing department should be profitable. Then your markup on the shirt can be nominal or whatever you feel you can capture, and that's extra profit. Now that might cover some administrative costs, obviously purchasing and so forth. You might want to find a mix between the two about being how you blend in the profit of your shirt with screen printing. But I've always felt that if I'm making money on printing, then I'm in good shape, and then I can actually work pretty low on the margin of the shirt. This is really what controls our pricing strategy. So what we did here is we just said, oh, we're going to make a 30% profit margin. Not markup. I'm sure most of you know the difference between a markup and basically profit margin is what percentage of the final sale price am I going to keep? So in this case, it's 30%. So there's a formula to do that. I won't get into that. You can figure that out. But basically, it's just taking this whole price grid up here above and marking it up so that it has a 30% profit margin. Now I have a price sheet to look at. You know, you can set up rounding. Maybe you want to work in to round it to the nickel and so forth. But that's how I come up with basically a price sheet. And now I've got this where I can start doing scenarios. So I've got spreadsheets that got 12 different variations. Let's look at it with a 35% margin. Some people want to adjust it so that the margin is lower on the higher quantities. Again, that's all in how you want to control your business, or perhaps it's how you got a structure to compete with your main competitors. I have mostly stuck with the same margin across the board, sometimes bumping up here, because even though the theory seems accurate, the truth is these small orders, they still take as much time to process it in customer service and so forth. And I might say, hey, I want to make 50% on 12 to 24 pieces. So of course you could build out your spreadsheet to change that. So I'm sure there's probably lots of questions on that. I hope it came across as pretty understandable. Really, then that the key point here is you got to get your fixed costs, wages, and all your overhead, and break it down into an hourly. You got to determine what your material costs are. And then you got to be able to break that down into a unit based on either some kind of estimate or some kind of history. And then you need to have some realistic goals of what you're going to be able to get for press rates and what your setup times are. And then you got to be able to build that out into a matrix that you can then apply a markup to.